Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the MMA Corner News Show. As we come to you every Sunday, give you the week's top news stories. I'm your host, Josh Davis, alongside my news panel, feature columnists at the MMAcorner.com, Eric Reinert and Trey Downey. Guys, how you doing today?
Super.
The duper.
There we go. You know,
it's a team operation here, Josh.
It really is. It really is. And, you know, holy crap, guys, a whole lot of stuff has gone on this week. And usually weeks leading into fight weeks, you know, not a whole lot of news breaks, not a whole lot of stuff happens because, you know, everything's related to fight week. Well, I mean, obviously, a whole lot of stuff has broke in the last, you know, I would say 8 days. We got Holly Holm coming to the UFC. Sounds pretty much like the Gina Carano deal is all but finalized, and we'll be getting an announcement about Gina Carano and Ronda Rousey fighting in December in the coming weeks. You know, we've got a whole lot of stuff that has been released this week. However, there are a couple main topics that I want to focus on, and the first topic I want to start. We had a whole lot of stuff related to the NSAC, Nevada State Athletic Commission. NSAC held their hearing this week, and there were, God, I think there were 64 total items on the docket, one of which was Vitor Belfort, another of which was Chael Sonnen, and finally, not that we're really about, but I thought it was very interesting, Floyd Mayweather applying for his promoter's license. But what we are going to talk about is Vitor Belfort. Vitor, I don't know if anyone watched it. If not, you can certainly go to the MMAcorner.com, find the link, and review a replay of it. If you didn't watch it, Vitor, you know, I would like to think that he was very honest in the things that he had said. He was open about his use of TRT. He was open about the amount that he had been taking. He was open about when he was taking it. So I am hopeful that the words that were coming out of his mouth were legitimate, were actually the truth. Because otherwise, I don't know why you would lie about saying you took a double dose on this day instead of spreading it out. Because it didn't make him look good. It made him look like a cheater. So the fact that he was honest and forthcoming with the commission, I liked. But here's the thing. From where I sat, he openly admitted to essentially cheating as far as I'm concerned. Openly admitted to taking more than the authorized dose for what commissions allow, all of that kind of stuff. And now he's being rewarded with a title shot. Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, UFC 181. Let me ask you this, guys. Does Vitor truly deserve this title shot? Knowing everything that we do about TRT and, you know, how he's failed multiple tests. Vanderlei just failed a test. He's not getting a title shot. Chael Sonnen just was banned for 2 years by the NSAC in the same hearing. Obviously, he's not getting a title shot. Dana has said he hates TRT, he's against it, and that Vitor is going to be 100% clean for this fight. Guys, honestly, let's start off with you, Eric, and then Trey, follow him up. Does Vitor deserve this title shot?
Well, I'm going to approach this question from the most cynical possible standpoint, and I'm sure for anybody that's watching this that's also read my stuff, that's going to come as a gigantic surprise, right? You know, I think that the UFC is saying all the right things when it comes to testosterone replacement therapy, because if they want to be accepted as a member of like the mainstream pantheon of American sports, your NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, etc., they need to behave in the same kind of public relations type way that those other organizations do with regard to performance-enhancing drugs. So again, I think it's no coincidence that with the fact that they've gotten more exposure on Fox and Fox Sports 1, they've kind of amped up their messaging about the need to, you know, rid their promotion of the scourge that is performance-enhancing drugs. Unfortunately, when it comes to some specific instances, they send absolutely the opposite message because, Josh, as you just pointed out, Vitor Belfort has been one of the most unabashed users of performance-enhancing drugs. Now, granted, he was taking advantage of the therapeutic use exemptions that some states were handing out. But, you know, all things considered, he was one of that small group of fighters who had become known for using performance-enhancing drugs. So for the UFC to immediately give him a title shot, I think sends the message that they're more concerned about how exciting a fight can be than the history of the fighters with regard to performance-enhancing drugs. And I think that that's something they've demonstrated over and over and over again. I don't blame them for doing that because, hey, I'm all for an exciting fight. I just wish that the messaging wasn't so mixed, whereas on one hand they're saying, you know, performance-enhancing drugs are so bad, where on the other hand they're giving maybe the most blatant user of performance-enhancing drugs in the last 5 years an immediate title shot after, you know, a lengthy layoff. So, you know, all that being said, does Vitor Belfort truly deserve a title shot? I'm going to actually say yes, but only for the following reasons. Number one, just looking kind of at the list of people, other middleweight contenders potentially. I mean, there's Anderson Silva, who Chris Weidman has beat twice, and he just beat Lyoto Machida. Jacare and Gegard Mousasi are fighting each other. Luke Rockhold is hurt and also lost to Belfort previously. And, you know, I don't even know if Tim Kennedy belongs in this conversation, but just for the sake of the argument, you know, he's already fighting with Yoel Romero. So if only by default, Vitor Belfort, I think, does deserve this shot. I think it does have the potential to be a very exciting fight. Vitor Belfort does have 3 wins in a row, and, you know, they've all come by spectacular means. So, you know, certainly on paper this one makes sense. So strictly from a promotional standpoint, and given the fact that there are really no other middleweight contenders that make sense to put in front of Chris Weidman, I think that Vitor Belfort should get this fight with all of that stipulated.
Trey,
I have to say that he deserves. I don't know if he deserves it, but it's really the only way that the UFC can go at this point. They're never going to get the Vitor Belfort monkey off the back because regardless of what he's done, there's Vitor Belfort supporters out there. There's a lot of people that want to see Vitor Belfort get in the cage with Chris Weidman. And if they don't give him the title shot or if he got suspended or something like that, you're still going to see these people, you know, saying, oh, Vitor's the true champion. Vitor should be in there with Weidman. And Weidman is a guy who's all about, you know, validation. People still don't give him credit, you know, as the true middleweight champion after the 2 unfortunate outcomes in his 2 fights with Anderson Silva. And Weidman has asked for this fight numerous times. Belfort was in those other fights, in those contender bouts while he was on TRT. If he is completely off it now, yes, it does take the luster off of those victories. And I'm 100% completely against TRT. I think that no fighter should have ever taken it. They say that they need it to live a healthy lifestyle. I call that blatant BS because, I mean, Dan Henderson went off of it for his fight with Rashad Evans and was just fine, you know. They don't need to have their testosterone levels at the level of a younger fighter. The advantage of a fighter as you age is your experience. Your physical abilities will drown some, but you have that experience that's supposed to push you over the hump. Now, if you have that experience combined with the same levels that, you know, a young guy is having, that completely, you know, changes the playing field, which is why I was against every argument that was for TRT in the past. But we're in a position now where Vitor's off of it, and Weidman said that he wanted him even when he was on TRT to just pound him and prove that he could beat him anyway. Chris Weidman has that kind of confidence. Vitor Belfort put on those performances, and this is a fight that fans want to see. I was a lot more excited to see Chris Weidman and Vitor Belfort than I was Chris Weidman and Lyoto Machida. Chris Weidman and Lyoto Machida turned out to be a great fight, but, you know, Machida, the luster behind Machida just doesn't do it for me. I mean, if you want to look back at Vitor's performances even, he gave John Jones a heck of a fight. He almost had the guy in an arm bar. It looked like John Jones's arm was broken. Besides Alexander Gustafsson, that's the closest John Jones has ever been to being defeated. And his only, you know, other loss, I believe, since returning to the UFC was when Anderson Silva kicked his face off. So, you know, regardless it was legal at the time. It's, you know, I think MMA is in a funky position, especially if one of these big TRT guys would have won a title while they were on TRT, because we would look back at them as like we look at the guys in the steroids era, like Mark McGuire and things like that. Some of the stuff that they were taking was legal at the time, and now it's not, and we don't look back at them as true record holders anymore. So it's better that he's off of it. I think we're in a situation like how we view like guys like Nelson Cruz and Ryan Braun, and how we'll view A-Rod if he ever comes back. So, you know, Vitor's going to get in there, and he's going to fight for the title. I think he's going to lose personally, and the world would love it. And, you know, there's going to be Brazilians that are going to be happy if he wins. But the number one thing I'm glad this fight is in Nevada, because there is no way that the UFC could have put this fight on in Brazil and have any credibility behind it. So if they're going to do it, I'm glad that it's in Vegas, and I'm glad the steps that the Nevada State Athletic Commission is making, they're in the right direction, and they're doing the right thing for this fight, and they're going to test, you know, Belfort anytime they want to, and I fully believe that they're going to. And if he isn't clean, they're going to catch him. And then, you know, a guy like Rockhold or, you know, Jacare could step in. But if he's clean, you know, get in there, take one last shot, Vitor.
I got a follow-up question for both of you guys. Trey, you touched on the fact that it's in Nevada and that they're going to be testing Vitor Belfort like crazy. What % chance do you put this fight of actually taking place?
I think I'd go towards 80%, maybe even higher. I'd go I'm gonna say 95, because unless Vitor Belfort is a complete idiot, he won't. I think if it gets to a point where he thinks he might have to take some TRT, he would pull out of the fight due to injury or something. This is his last chance. If he gets popped for any kind of drugs like this, it's like Chael Sonnen. If he gets popped this time, he's done. And I think he has the drive and wants to be a champion. So no matter if he is going to be, his skills are going to be diminished, I think he's going to go through with it just because he wants that shot. I don't think Vitor Belfort is that dumb.
A couple of things. First off, I put the over and under at 62%. And I'll tell you why. Here's the thing. It's not like he just takes TRT when he feels like it, you know, when he, all right, you know, this month I'm going to take it, next month I'm not. No, he takes this stuff routinely. And like any other drug or anything else that you put into your body starts to gain a dependency. And I look at this like any other addiction. And as you try and wean yourself off of it, you going just straight cold turkey is going to be a problem. And I think that's one of the things that the NSAC failed to take into consideration here. How is Vitor just going to stop taking TRT? Seriously, his body is going to go through shock. There's going to be withdrawals. There's going to be all of that kind of stuff. I don't think it's going to be as easy as just not taking it. And if they are testing him, you know, seriously, weekly or every other day, like it sounds like they're going to, in my mind, there's a good possibility that he's probably at some point possibly going to fail a test, not necessarily for TRT, but some other supplement that he's trying to get, that his body is trying to get the same feel out of, that is already a banned substance by WADA. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes, but I'm putting this at 62%. Now, Trey, you brought up an excellent point about this fight being in Vegas. While I think it's great that it's in Vegas in the regards that Vitor had to go through this to get his licensing done, and he's going to have to take these additional tests, so we'll know, essentially, we should know that he's clean. But I don't like it in Vegas, in the fact that they still haven't corrected their problems with judging. And until we have the NSAC doing something about the corrupt judges scoring that we've had in Vegas, especially in past title fights. I'll just throw out the GSP Johnny Hendricks fight as a basis. I'm not thrilled that this fight is in Vegas, because again, you know, let's say Vitor just totally beats the crap out of Weidman, you know, and then Weidman gets the victory on the judge's scorecard because he's the champion, and we have seen Vegas do that in the past. So I go back and forth, but I am stoked in the fact that the NSAC will be monitoring Vitor, and hopefully he will be clean for this fight.
Judges are not going to come into play into this contest, gentlemen. Chris
Well,
Weidman.
They've made progress. I mean, we've seen, and Nevada's got 5 months, 4.5 months to get their act together more, get the right judges in there. It's not taking place till December. The judging could be a complete other topic because we saw the judges' scorecards were questionable when John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson first fought. This is a segue to the next topic, I guess, but we've got another big title fight coming up in Nevada that judging might be an issue in as well.
Nope.
And I'm not calling conspiracy or anything like that. I want to be very clear about that. All I'm saying is there have been questionable decisions in every state. Period. Yeah. But Nevada, if we're just being honest, has been notorious for some questionable decisions. Yeah. And again, with these big fights, I just want to make sure if it does go to the judges that we have judges who truly know what they're doing when they're scoring this fight. Now, I too don't think that this fight will go to the judges, but I didn't think last night's main event would go to the judges either, and it did. So you never know how these things are going to play out. Now, real quickly before we move on to the next topic, the original question was, does Vitor deserve this title shot? I'm going to say yes for the simple fact, Eric alluded to it earlier, who else are you going to give the title shot to? You can't throw Weidman on the shelf and just have him sit out there. You can't. You got to let Chris Weidman fight. He is the champion, and whether or not you think he's a true champion or you don't is relevant. He is the champion. He beat Anderson Silva twice. He whooped on Lyoto Machida. I was a doubter. Now I'm a believer. I think this fight makes sense again because there is nobody else, and it's a fight that Weidman wants. And I think if Weidman puts his stamp on Vitor, then there's no way all the doubters can't say, hey, this kid is legit. So I think it's a good fight all around. Trey alluded to this, so I'll have Trey start it off. Next topic. Alexander Gustafsson out. He is out with a knee injury. How significant it is, I don't think really anyone knows quite yet what the true damage is, but what we do know is it's significant enough that he can't fight. He's out. Daniel Cormier is in. Apparently Daniel Cormier will be fighting his daddy, John Jones. So, Trey, give me your thoughts. What do you think of this fight? Does it make sense? Is it the right fight at the right time? What's up?
It makes sense. As far as the thing about how bad Gustafsson's injury is, I think it's pretty bad. Gustafsson wanted this fight so bad. You could just tell anytime he spoke about it after that first fight, and even going into this first fight, it had to be something really bad for him to pull out of this shot against John Jones. And especially when you have a title fight like this lined up, you never know when you're going to get another shot or things like that. You have to take your title shots when you get them, which I think Daniel Cormier is doing in this instance. I mean, the guy said that he was going to have his knee is injured still going into this fight. He hadn't had his surgery yet. His surgery was coming up rather soon, and now he's stepping into this fight. It's the right fight because Cormier is right up there as far as the rankings go. A lot of people are really high on Daniel Cormier. I'm not one of them. I think John Jones still wins this fight. I think John Jones is still the UFC light heavyweight champion come September 28th. I think as far as who in the light heavyweight division has the ability to go after John Jones and give him the fight of his life, I tweeted it last night. I think I'm the man we saw in last night's co-main event knock out Antonio Rogerio Nogueira in 41 seconds. Anthony Rumble Johnson is a guy that's an absolute beast at 205 and that can give John Jones trouble. Cormier is a guy who's fast. He's got a lot of people point to his resume, but if you look at a lot of his wins, I feel like he got them over guys that were past their prime. Josh Barnett past his prime, Frank Mir past his prime, and then his two wins at light heavyweight are against a coffee barista and a guy that probably should have retired 2 years ago. So, I mean, Cormier's a great fighter. I just don't think he's at John Jones' level. He's probably a top 5 light heavyweight. I mean, honestly, the win over Patrick Cummins looks better and better every time Patrick Cummins steps inside the cage. But, I mean, I just have a hard time picking anybody against John Jones. And I've just never really thought that Cormier was the guy, because even though he fought at heavyweight, I don't think he's going to be that much bigger than Jones. Jones is still going to have a reach advantage, things like that. I just don't I just don't see DC as the guy to do it. It's going to be a great fight, and the lead up to this is going to be good because Jones actually has some fire in this and is going to fire back at his opponent, and is more than ever is really going to embrace the heel persona that he should have a long time ago if he wants to truly become a huge pay-per-view draw. The rest of this year is shaping up really good for the UFC. Big fights, big rematches. This is one that people really wanted to see. I don't think Cormier is going to beat him, and I think the biggest question mark into this still has to be Cormier's injury. He said he wasn't going to fight and he wasn't going to wait because he was going to get knee surgery, and then this opportunity comes up and you take it. Are you going to be 100%, or are we going to find out after the fight that Daniel Cormier trained for this fight and fought this whole fight on a torn meniscus, and then we go through this whole saga again. Could a healthy Daniel Cormier beat John Jones? This might not be the right, you have to take your title shots when they come, but Cormier was in a position where he could have waited. So, I don't know. Like I said, I think the guy that could take the belt off John Jones is Anthony Johnson. I probably wouldn't pick him, but John Jones is the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and Daniel Cormier is not going to unseat him from that.
Eric, give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I gotta agree with most of what Trey said. Is Cormier the most dangerous opponent right now that's available for John Jones? I think. I think Rumble Johnson, as Trey alluded to, could give him a run for his money. But in terms of being an all-around fighter, I think that Cormier kind of fits that bill a little bit more completely. Now, does that mean that he stands a chance against John Jones? Not to me. The biggest key here is that Jones is 6'4" and Cormier is 5'11". That's a big difference when you're fighting in the cage, and I'm sure the reach difference is even more significant. Cormier's game relies a lot on wrestling, getting inside his opponent's range, using his strength, his raw strength, to overpower his opponents and do the things that we saw him do, I suppose, most significantly to Dan Henderson. Trey's the biggest point that Trey brought up that I agree with has to do with Cormier's past competition. As Trey said, he hasn't really fought anybody that's really even close to John Jones's level. Now, if he would have fought Dan Henderson, 5-10 years ago, and done the same thing that he did to him back in May, I think we'd be telling a different story here. But the fact that Henderson is getting up there in age. Again, he was also a guy who used testosterone replacement therapy, but not against Daniel Cormier, and was also just much, much smaller of a fighter. That's not going to be the case for John Jones. I love this fight because I think that it's one of the small handful of fights against John Jones that's really sellable. Cormier has been very dominant against his opposition, whatever quality they have been, and he's a guy who, as an undefeated fighter, certainly deserves to be in the title conversation. So with Gustafsson out, and Gustafsson having thus far posed the biggest threat to John Jones's title reign, I think the next logical guy on that list is DC. And I think this fight is probably going to be just as big of a draw, if not bigger, than Alexander Gustafsson, because of the fact that it's kind of like fresh blood coming in against the reigning champion. I got Jones here probably by decision because Cormier's got to be tough to put away. He's never been defeated. I can't imagine he's going to be an easy guy to finish. So this is going to be a war of attrition here. But I guess my early pick is John Jones. But overall, I love the fight as a headliner for a pay-per-view.
Yeah. First off, I think right now, with the injury to Gustafsson, this fight makes perfect sense. This is the fight for the division, and I'll say for this reason. Right now, I like what Trey said about Anthony Rumble Johnson, except I still think Anthony needs a another fight, if not 2 more fights against elite competition before I put him in there with John Jones. I love Rashad Evans, but we already know John's going to whoop Rashad every time they fight. Other than Gustafsson, there's really no one else in the division for John Jones to fight. So for me, this fight makes perfect sense. If John Jones whoops Daniel Cormier, like most people really think he's going to, this is perfect. He can leave the light heavyweight division, not retire, but move on as the greatest light heavyweight champion ever, and he can move up to heavyweight, which is really at this point in time where he needs to be. I think the biggest draw right now would be the fight between Cain Velasquez and John Jones. And so if he gets past Daniel Cormier, Cain gets past Fabricio Verdum, I think logically as far as super fights go, the way they could bill it, John Jones just be Cain's teammate, blah, blah, blah. I think that fight makes the most sense. So with all that being said, I think this fight is perfect for the UFC, perfect for John Jones. It gives everyone the opportunity to do the things that they want. John wants to go down as the greatest in history. He gets this victory, he'll probably be able to do that and then relinquish the belt and move up and dominate in the heavyweight division. So this fight gives everybody a lot of opportunities. And flip the coin, if Cormier is able to whoop on John Jones, well, we have a new champion. We have new parity to the division, or maybe they'll do an immediate rematch. Who knows? But again, it gives them more kinds of options. So I do think the UFC made the right move here. And as far as Cormier not having his knee surgery, I don't know anything about this. I'm just speculating here. But the fact that, he was so vocal that he was going to have it done and not only didn't have it done, but really never even scheduled it, leads me to believe that he was probably thinking, hey, I need to be ready in case somebody gets injured, and so I think there was more to that than what we're led to believe. So we'll just have to see how it goes. Moving right along, this is the story that I've been wanting to talk about all week. I'm like a little kid at Christmas here. I remember when I got the text, and I'm not going to go into details about who I got the text from, but it was very simple. It said I just signed my contract. I started doing happy dances. I was stoked. I was screaming. My wife was looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? And I just showed her the phone, and even she, lit up and was like, ooh, So I'm so stoked about this, and it's very simple. Guys, Nick Diaz, back in the UFC, signed a 3-fight deal. For me, I'm a huge Diaz supporter, and he's always been great to the MMA Corner. I love this. I know Rob, on the other hand, he's probably rolling over, cringing. I think this is good for the UFC. I think this is good for both Diaz brothers, actually. I think in the coming weeks we'll see something get done with Nate now, because Nick is always taking care of his brother, and I'm sure that in Nick's signing, part of what he told Dana and Fertitta is, you need to get my brother taken care of. So I'm certain that we'll see something with that in the coming weeks. But let me ask you guys this. Now, I'm a huge Diaz supporter, but he hasn't fought in years. He hasn't fought since, he lost to GSP. And if we're just being honest, he didn't look good in that fight. He didn't show up to fight that night. Didn't look good. The fight before that, Carlos Condit. I've watched that fight probably 100 times. I sat cage side and watched it live. And watching it live, I thought Diaz won the fight. I scored for him, thought he was the champion. Since I have come back home and watched it on my couch and really studied it, Carlos Condit won that fight. I don't really think there's any question. So back-to-back losses. Didn't look good and really in either one of those losses. Hasn't fought in a long time. We pretty much know who his fight's going to be, even though they won't actually confirm it. I want to throw it out to you guys, though. Let's start with you, Eric. Who should Nick Diaz's return fight to the UFC be?
Well, I want to apologize to Trey here for probably stealing what he's going to say.
Well, let me start off with Trey then.
Oh, okay. No,
No,
he
I'm
said
just kidding.
say
I'm
it,
just
so I'm
kidding.
gonna
I'm
say it.
just kidding.
I mean, because Trey and I tend to agree on a lot of things when it comes to mixed martial arts, even down to the esoterica of it all. And I think there's only one guy in the welterweight division who makes the most sense to fight against Nick Diaz. And before I say his name, I'm gonna describe him. He's a guy he's a warrior. He, like Diaz, put together quite an impressive winning streak, including a lot of finishes in a row. He's a guy who is extremely tough to put away himself, just like Nick Diaz. One might call him immortal. He is also, like Nick Diaz, coming off a loss against the top guy in the welterweight division, and I think putting this fighter against Nick Diaz would be not only welterweight relevance gold, but box office gold as well. This fight could headline a pay-per-view, in my opinion. And that, of course, even though they're both coming off of losses. Maybe I'm being a little bit overzealous here, but I'm talking about Nick Diaz versus Matt Brown. This is the fight that makes the most sense for me for Nick Diaz coming back, not only because of its relevance to the welterweight division overall, because, sure, Nick Diaz is coming off of 2 losses, but they're against 2 of the top guys in the division. He has always been one of the best fighters in the world. And honestly, and again, I'm probably overstating things here, but I think if the UFC had no time limits, Nick Diaz would be an undefeated fighter in the UFC. Because really the only things that have kept him down have been time limit decisions. He is a guy who is really tough to finish, like Matt Brown. I think this one would be an absolute slugfest, and the interactions between the 2 fighters in the days leading up to the contest would only serve to hype it up that much more for the UFC. So Nick Diaz versus Matt Brown, that's a fight that I hope to see before both of them retire.
Now, real quickly before I turn it over to Trey, on that note, can you imagine the stare down between Matt Brown and Nick Diaz? Matt Brown had walked up, chest out, arms down, fists clenched, flexing, ready to go. And Nick's going to step up, nose to nose, forehead to forehead, and then stick his arms out. Yeah, I want to see that. I'm all about it. Trey, give us your thoughts.
Eric has me, both of you guys have me completely pumped up, and that's the fight that makes the most sense. But Josh, as you alluded to at the beginning, that's not the fight that we're going to get. We're going to get a very good fight, one that I'm not sure that Nick Diaz particularly deserves, but I fully believe that we are going to see Nick Diaz versus a returning Anderson the Spider Silva at middleweight on Super Bowl weekend. I believe that's the fight that we're going to see, and I mean, Diaz might not deserve it, but I think that's almost a perfect comeback fight for Anderson Silva. There's really not a lot of guys in the middleweight division that make sense for Silva, unless you have unless the winner of Michael Bisping and Kung Lee. That's really the only other one that comes to mind. But as far as a real pay-per-view headliner, I think Silva and Bisping could do it. But Silva and Diaz, two of the most recognizable names in the sport, would be a great fight. And Diaz is a guy who you can say, if Silva comes back and gets a big win over him, that's the guy that could warrant Silva getting a title shot, which I think Silva only has to win one fight before he gets the title shot. Both guys have expressed interest in fighting each other in the past. It's a great stylistic matchup. Both guys are great strikers and great jiu-jitsu practitioners. Both aren't the best, as far as wrestling goes. So we're gonna see these 2 guys slug it out technically, and these are 2 of the kings of taunting. We talked about how much we'd want to see the Nick Diaz and Matt Brown stare down. But imagine what Nick Diaz is going to do if Anderson Silva starts playing air guitar when he's fighting him. I don't think that Anderson Silva would have the time to do that with the pressure that Diaz will bring. But I mean, just imagine that. That's such an interesting dynamic. Josh, I know you are one of the biggest Diaz supporters. I'm more on Rob's side of the spectrum. I feel like this is a guy who kind of complained and retired after the Carlos Condit fight, just because just because the decision didn't go his way, and then the UFC comes back and caters to him and gives him a title shot, and then the UFC comes back and caters to him, and I'm sure gave him huge money to even come back this time after he, turned down multiple fights. I fully believe that the UFC offered him the fight that happened this past Saturday, that Brown would have been fighting Diaz in San Jose if Diaz would have accepted the fight when Dana and Nick were in negotiations earlier this year. I don't like the precedent that the UFC is setting, but whether it's Matt Brown or whether it's Anderson Silva, I will fully pay the $65, maybe pay $75 to see that fight and not regret a second of it.
Here's the thing. Does Nick Diaz deserve to be back in the UFC? Honestly, I don't know. I haven't seen the guy fight in a long time. I know what he's been doing. I know why he didn't sign with the UFC earlier, and I'm not going to go into his personal business because that's not my place to do it. But there were specific reasons why a deal hadn't gotten done already. Now, did everybody involved pretty much know that this point in time was coming? Yeah, it was. It was pretty much a formality. It just Nick needed to take care of some other things before this happened. I will say this. The behind-the-scenes rumblings that I am getting is both Nick and Anderson want this fight. Nick's wanted this fight for a long time. Anderson's people think this is a great return fight to see where Anderson's at. Yes, he's rehabbing well, this, that, and the other. But until he gets back inside that cage, no one knows how he's gonna, what type of fighter he's gonna be when he returns. And so I think Nick's the perfect guy. You could throw him in there against a true middleweight, someone that could truly beat him up, somebody that could truly hurt him, somebody that could truly do damage. Or you could throw him in against Nick Diaz. Now, if Nick wins this fight, it's not going to be because he one-punched KO'd Anderson. He doesn't have that kind of power. If he gets the perfect right placement like he did against Robbie Lawler, different story. But Nick's not known for his one-punch KO power. If he is going to win this fight, it's because he outpoints Anderson, he outgrapples Anderson, all of that kind of stuff. But he's not going to beat him. He's not going to knock him senseless. He's not big enough. He's not strong enough. He doesn't have that kind of power. So if you're Anderson Silva's reps, this is the perfect fight to take. Plus, as much as I love Diaz on paper, this is a fight that Anderson should win. He is the more powerful striker. He's probably the more technical striker. If we're just being honest, even though Diaz has world-class jiu-jitsu, so does Anderson Silva. Anderson's going to be bigger, stronger, better in the clinch. So again, on paper, this is a perfect return fight for Anderson. So I understand why they're doing it. I understand why the UFC is doing it, because they're going to be able to capitalize big money off of this. And while I do think it's worthy of a main event, I don't think it will be. I think it'll be the co-main event of the Super Bowl card. I think they're really going to stack this card. I think this will be the co-main event. It'll help cover all of the pay-per-view percentages that they're going to have to pay out to everybody. So I think that is how they will do it. However, with that being said, the UFC is doing this fight, I think, purely on a monetary standpoint, because it makes no sense for either of the divisions. Nick's a welterweight, Anderson's a middleweight. A victory over Nick Diaz is not going to propel Anderson back into a title shot. It's just not going to happen. The victory over Anderson, if Nick gets it, probably isn't going to propel him into an immediate title shot either. So as far as the divisions and the future of that kind of stuff goes, it makes no sense. So with that being said, I do know that Nick's ready to fight tomorrow. I mean, if there was an event tomorrow, Nick would happily be on it. Don't be surprised if Nick Diaz hounds Dana White enough to get a fight before February. Obviously, if he loses, that would flush February down the toilet. But if he wins, it gives more credence to what they're trying to do there. It would make more money. So I would not be surprised if we saw Nick Diaz in the pay-per-view sometime, possibly in November. We'll just have to wait and see how it goes. All right, guys, done rambling. So excited to have Nick Diaz back. Can't wait for it. Uh, Final thoughts. Eric, let's start with you.
Well, Trey sort of mentioned this guy's name earlier in the show, and I try, as critical as I can often be of policies and of sports and of just hypocrisy. One thing I try not to do is hate on individual fighters. In fact, I try to do the opposite. And so today I'm gonna try to do that with Pat Cummins. When Pat Cummins first broke into the UFC, it was on an extremely short notice to fight one of the most hardcore light heavyweights in the sport in Daniel Cormier. And Daniel Cormier did to Pat Cummins what pretty much everybody thought Daniel Cormier was going to do to a guy who'd never fought in the UFC, despite Pat Cummins' prolific athletic achievements from his days at Penn State. When Pat Cummins kind of came into the UFC, he had a lot of bluster with him, and I think that maybe rubbed some people the wrong way, particularly because he was going against a guy in Daniel Cormier who was a proven champion, not only at the wrestling level, but pretty much dominated every guy that he came into contact with in mixed martial arts. So, for Pat Cummins to get beat down so badly by Daniel Cormier, I think some people maybe thought that he was getting what he deserved after he came in with all that big talk. However, after that, some guys might have given up after sort of that introduction into the UFC, brief as it was, but not Pat Cummins. He came back a couple months later and really starched Roger Navarez. Won by TKO in the second round, and then last night Kyle Kingsbury retired after this fight, so clearly he was kind of at the end of his career taking on Pat Cummins. But Cummins whooped him to the effect that one judge scored it 30-24, which is almost never seen in mixed martial arts. So and that could say more about that judge than about the actual scorecard. But Pat Cummins dominated every minute of that fight. Is he ever going to contend for the light heavyweight title? I'm not sure. But I give him a lot of credit for, not only stepping in against a guy like Daniel Cormier, but then, kind of rebounding from that humiliating loss and establishing himself as a force to be reckoned with somewhere in the light heavyweight division. I think that he's going to have a career in the UFC, obviously, as long as he keeps being successful. But he seems like a guy who says, yes, this fight against Kyle Kingsbury came on an extremely short turnaround from his fight over Roger Navarez. So, I think Pat Cummins does have a bright future in the UFC, and I give him a lot of credit for, kind of coming back from that starching at the hands of Daniel Cormier to not only perform, but perform successfully and dominate some of his fights that he's had afterwards. So good on you, Pat Cummins.
I have to agree 100%, and I know a lot of people were just flat out making fun of Pat Cummins after he was whooped by Daniel Cormier. But look at the guy now; he's rebounded well. He's proven that he does belong in the UFC. Maybe not co-main event status,
Yeah.
but he belongs there. So kudos to Pat. Trey.
Eric just talked about Pat Cummins, and I'm going to talk about a guy who is Pat Cummins' best friend. He also fights in the UFC. Another MMA website did a feature on these two's friendship and leading up to them both fighting last night, and that man is Dennis Bermudez. The guy is now on a 7-fight win streak. He has a win streak in the UFC longer than his division's champion in Jose Aldo. Last night he finished a guy that just doesn't get finished in Clay Guida. He submitted him. The only other guy I believe in recent memory to finish him was what Chad Mendez did to him, and we all know, everyone here knows my feelings about Chad Mendez and his standing in the UFC featherweight division. Me and Eric for the last couple months have been on the Matt Brown bandwagon, and every time I brought up Matt Brown as far as being the guy who should get the next welterweight title shot, I held up my fingers and I showed his win streak. Now I can do that with Dennis Bermudez. The guy has 7 straight victories in the UFC.
Same number of fingers.
7. I started with 6 with Matt Brown, went to 7, but now I'm on the Dennis Bermudez 7 straight wins. People question the level of competition. He's fought tough guys. Last year, one of the fights of the year against Mac Rice. He holds a decision victory over Max Holloway, Jimmy Hedis, who was another rising guy, and then last night when he stepped in the cage with Clay Guida, and as Joe Rogan said on the broadcast numerous times, Bermudez's only loss in the UFC was in the tough finale against Diego Brandao. But every time Bermudez goes out there, Bermudez gets better. He keeps getting better and better and looks more impressive and more impressive. 2 straight finishes. He's not going through. He's not taking the punishment. And some could have expected that in a fight against Guida. He did take a couple right hands and he was able to walk right through him. Bermudez is a guy who just keeps going. He's very similar to Matt Brown in a sense, to where he can just take the punishment and keep going. He's a guy that's going to grind you out and go after that victory. And still, he's ranked number 12 in the division, and that is complete blasphemy. I talked about it with Josh last week on the recap show after the Ireland card, and there's so much hype around Conor McGregor, and no one will talk about Dennis Bermudez. Conor McGregor has won 3 fights in the UFC. Him and Bermudez have the one shared victory over Max Holloway. Bermudez lost to Brandao way back when. But, I'm sorry, but Conor McGregor hasn't beaten anyone on the level of Clay Guida. He hasn't, finished Clay Guida. I believe if Bermudez fought Diego Brandao last weekend, he would have beat him. You just don't get 7 straight victories in the UFC. They showed the graphic of the guys who had the longest win streak in the UFC, and I believe the only guys that were ahead of Bermudez are John Jones and Chris Weidman. And that just shows how far that this guy has come. Usually when you see a guy rise through the ranks, they'll have a setback here and there. They'll have a setback when they go through their win streak, but they'll still get a good guy, and it'll look super impressive and go back up. That hasn't happened to Bermudez. Bermudez has kept on ticking and, just kept going, and the guy deserves some respect and deserves a top 5 opponent. Maybe not a title shot, but he deserves to be in there with the mix, with Cub Swanson, with Frankie Edgar, with McGregor, with Poirier, with all of them. Let's just give Dennis Bermudez what he deserves, and that's the time to shine. One more time. That's in. Straight win.
On Thursday night, I'm doing the prediction show. I predicted Clay Guida to win this fight. I really thought that Guida would be able to do the things that Guida does best, and I was wrong. Bermudez whooped him. He was the better fighter. He was the better athlete. He was better in every aspect of MMA, to be real honest. And he won me over with his performance last night. It was, top notch. It was slick. Top 12 guy. I will tell you this. On my rankings for the MMAcorner.com, I will be moving Dennis Bermudez up. He's certainly a top 10 guy in my book. I agree with Trey that he has fought more quality opponents than Conor McGregor has. I don't care if he beat up 7 tomato cans in the UFC. If you get 7 straight victories in the UFC, you're one of the best there is. UFC doesn't bring in bitches to fight. I mean, they bring in the cream of the crop. The best guys in the world are fighting in the UFC. So if you whoop 7 straight asses, then you're pretty legit. So I agree. Dennis Bermudez needs to be moving up. People need to start respecting this kid. The UFC needs to continue to push him. I mean, obviously, we got a top 10 opponent last night with Clay Guida. I think they're going to continue to move him forward. Obviously, Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier are set to square off next. But I do like Cub Swanson. I think Dennis Bermudez, Cub Swanson, I think that would be a good matchup. I think that would be a hell of a fight. If I'm Cub Swanson, it's probably not a fight that I'm going to take because I have way more to lose than I have to gain. But, again, if I'm the UFC, I'm pushing Dennis Bermudez to have big fights. All right, guys, that is going to do it for today's episode of the MMA Corner News Show. But before we get out of here, always check out the MMAcorner.com, your home for all things MMA. Anything you need is up there. If you missed the fights last night, get on the site. Check out all the video highlights. They're up. They're ready to go. Definitely check out Eric's story about how the UFC needs to shake things up in regards to their pay-per-views.
You know, one week out, they've done a hell of a job stacking up the rest of the pay-per-views for the year. And Trey said it at the beginning of the show, and I will agree with him that they've really, I think, noticed sort of the downward trend that has been happening with their pay-per-view cards, and it certainly seems like they're trying their best to stack them up for the rest of the year. So good on them.
Exactly. Well, I think they read your article. And I think that was the turning point. They read the article, and boom, now things are changing. That's how we do it at the MMAcorner.com. We are game changers.
Needle movers.
Exactly. Dana has never said we don't move the needle. That is for sure. So, with all of that being said, guys, again, I want to recap UFC 172, which was scheduled for August 2nd, next Saturday, has been canceled. So there is no event for next week, but we are coming back Wednesday. I'm sorry, we will be coming back Thursday, August 14th, to give you fight predictions for UFC Fight Night 47, which is Bader versus St. Preux. Then we will be back August 16th, immediately following the event, to give you our recap. And then, as always, every Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Mountain Time, 11 a.m. on the West Coast, the MMA Corner News Shows. We come at you with the best stories of the week. Again, that's going to do it for today. I do want to thank all of our partners. BattleBomb.com, the only pain reliever with the knockout power. www.battlebomb.com. Definitely check them out. Audio for all of these episodes is powered by Soul. Soul, power, clarity, comfort. Soul Electronics gets you some. And then our newest partner, go to the MMAcorner.com, look for Vitor's Ugly Mug. It's right there. Bony Asai. Check them out. Love their products. Get on it. All right, guys. For Eric Reiner, for Trey Downey, I'm Josh Davis. Keep living the MMA Corner lifestyle.